My name is Philip. Some of you know me, some of you don't. And I'm sure there's a bunch in the middle who are like, what's this face? Do I know it? So I have this slide. It's like, that's me. Some of you know me from my past life. In 2021, I worked at Google in the Flutter team, and a big part of my job was to make educational videos and talk at conferences and so on and so forth. In 2021, my life brought me back to Europe, and independently of that, so I quit Google, and independently of that, I also released my first ever game called Knights of San Francisco. And this was, again, independent. I worked on that game for forever, for like 8 years in my spare time. And it was released for iOS and Android in May 2021. And by the beginning of this year, it was named one of the best mobile games of 2021 by Touch Arcade, which is like the authority. Oh, thank you. Okay. There's more. So yeah. That's like the main iOS gaming magazine. It was named one of the best Android games of 2021 by Android Authority, which is like the authority of Android gaming. They got a lot of good press from like game journalists, and of course it got really good feedback from people. So and of course it's all in Dart and Flutter. So now you might be thinking, okay, Philip, this sounds a lot like bragging. And it is, absolutely, it is bragging. But I'm having a point here, and that is that I wanted you to not completely dismiss what I'm going to say next. So here goes. So this game that, was played and paid for by tens of thousands of people, was named best of and blah, 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 and got really good reviews. The code for this game is a mess. All right? It really is. It's not terrible, but it's definitely not something that I'm proud of. So that's kind of like the underlying thing for this talk is that if you know me, you would think that my talk will be very technical and it will be about performance or about some deep stuff or architecture at least. But I realized that, in fact, the most helpful thing that I can talk about, most of them are not technical. So that's my talk. So what I'm going to talk about is why you should even think about building a game yourself. Why should you be a solo developer? Isn't there enough games out there? Second, why most game projects fail, what to do about it, and if we have time at the end, we'll have like a little exercise. But first, I want to tell you about how one of the most famous movie directors of all time got in trouble by saying that Marvel movies are not cinema. That's one of my favorite things. All right, so Martin Scorsese is a famous movie director, and I promise this is relevant, but it's going to take time. And he said in a 2019 interview that he didn't consider Marvel movies cinema. And he got a lot of flack for that. And by the way, Marvel movies, I mean the Avengers, Thor, Iron Man, and stuff like this. I like these. I'm pretty sure many people here like them as well. It's very easy to dismiss this because, let's be honest, this is like an old guy, he's almost 80. He doesn't look something that's new. What a surprise, right? So you could be like, okay, so yeah, sure, whatever. But I think there's more to that, and it's actually something that I would like to talk about. So Martin Scorsese started making movies in late 60s, early 70s, at a time when movies were not art. Movies were entertainment. Sculpture was art, paintings were art, theater was art, but movies were not art. And so his generation of movie makers were all about like, how do we make movies that, yes, are entertaining, because let's be honest, watching a movie for 2 hours is more entertaining than like looking at a sculpture for 2 hours. So yes, they are more entertaining, but that have some kind of message, that have some kind of, they tell you something about yourself or about the society or something like this, right? And so he made movies like Taxi Driver and Goodfellas and Departed, and more recently, The Wolf of Wall Street, Shutter Island, and Irishman. And hopefully you will agree with me if you've seen some of these movies that they are interesting and they are entertaining, but they also like have something to tell you and they have some kind of message, right? And what Martin Scorsese is saying with his like Marvel movies are not cinema is he's not trying to say that they are bad. He says that they are amazing and they're great at what they're doing, but they are big projects made by corporations that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, and therefore because they are corporate projects, they are very much interested in reducing risk. They try to entertain you, but they don't want to give you a lot messaging because that could upset you, right? Contrast this with Taxi Driver, which if you've seen it, it's an entertaining movie, but you come out of the cinema kind of shaken. So that's not what Marvel movies want to do. And he says this: that's the nature of modern film franchises. Market research, audience tested, vetted, modified, revetted, and remodified until they're ready for consumption. And how is this relevant to games? Well, the same thing happens to games as well. It happens in games too. A lot like modern games, if you think about them, they are also sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in budget, and they are made by big corporations, and these big corporations are trying to reduce their risk. So, of course, they're not going to make like very revealing games, right? And now contrast this with my game, like Knights of San Francisco. This is a game that was released in 2021. It's basically a text game. It's all black and white. It's short. It's not free or not freemium. It's paid upfront. It has like 16 illustrations all in all. The music for that game is, you would think like, okay, so this is like a Dungeons and Dragons game, so it's going to be some like like some medieval melody, but instead of that, it's like indie rock and electronica. It's like, so it's so many like red flags for a potential big studio, and it's about mortality. The game is about, thankfully it's entertaining as well, but it's about how we are all going to die. So definitely not something that a big studio would make. And that's kind of my point, is that making your own solo project doesn't need to be just a pastime. It can be a bit of a calling. You can have something to say. And it doesn't need to be all weird. It could be just something like, okay, maybe you want to make a giant robot game. That's fine. It should be fun, right? But maybe you are like, okay, so you're coming from Finland, so maybe your giant robots designs are inspired by Finnish folklore. I would like to play this game. No big studio will do that. Only you can do that. Same with like, okay, maybe you were a nerd for ecology. Your giant robot game can be about a planet that has had giant robots for millions of years. What does it do to ecology? Kind of that kind of stuff. You still need to entertain people, but it can be about you. So that's something that the big studios can do, and that I think it makes your game more important than the next gaming franchise. Like, you are more important than the next Grand Theft Auto. Okay, so hopefully we've addressed why I would like all of you to think about maybe making games and just not having it as just a pastime. All right, so why game projects fail? I actually made a very unscientific poll to make sure that I'm not inventing stuff. And yes, most game projects, something like 97, 98% of game projects that are started are never finished. And there's a pattern. The pattern is you start a game project, you work on it sometimes months, then something happens, and then go to one. You start a new game project, and you abandon that before. And so we'll be looking at what happens in step number 3. This is kind of the ranking of the problems. I went ahead and made a little bit of a clustering of like what these reasons for not finishing game projects mean. And the first one is life happened. I didn't finish my game because life happened. I thought that I would have more time, but it turns out I don't, because something happened in my life, right? And there's a spectrum of seriousness of like sometimes the life happen event is really serious, like an illness in your family. Probably you should be dropping everything else and doing something else. But there's another part of the spectrum where maybe you just found a new Netflix show or something, and now instead of making games, you want to watch that Netflix show. Also, a reason to abandon your game, although I'd say that it's less serious and maybe, depends on your priorities. So there are definitely reasons, very good reasons to drop building your game. And so that's what I did with this cluster. Another one is you never intended to finish. Sometimes you just start to build a game and you absolutely don't want to finish. You just like kill time or something like this. And that's fine, but you'll notice that only a few % of projects are like that. Most game projects are started with the intention to finish. And then next, and the last, to me, the valid reason to not finish a game is just playtesting revealed the game is not fun. That happens many times. Something that is on paper fun and interesting is not interesting and fun when you actually implement it. Cool. So next one is basically a big chunk of things that is is a discipline problem. So you don't finish a game because you lack discipline, or you lose initial excitement for the project, work on the game becomes boring, and so on and so forth. That's combined probably the main reason, and this is also about priorities. And I'd say that the only thing to counter this is to realize before you start making your game is that game development is work. It is work. It seems like it's going to be fun, but sooner or later it's going to be boring. Sooner or later it's going to be frustrating and really hard. So if you start working on your project with the intention of finishing, you should know this. And you should apply all the normal stuff that you would do for normal work. So you're not motivated, just you have to go through it and just do it, even if it's boring. Be consistent. What helped for me is at some point I started doing this thing where every day I had to do at least 5 minutes of work on my game. And of course, like in 5 minutes you do almost nothing, but at least it's always there on your to-do list and it's always there for you to do. All right. Next up, that something happens when you start a newer and better project and then abandon the old one. And this is, I put it, it's kind of in that same sphere of the orange, like the discipline cluster, but it's special for me because I think that's where we software engineers kind of lie to ourselves. We start a new project and we like, well, I abandoned that one and I spent months on that one, but I learned a lot and now everything will be better. And the fact is that if you stop working on a project when it gets hard and frustrating, you're not really learning that much. You're basically, if it's easy, then you're just applying what you already know mostly, right? You really, at least for me, when I was working on my game, I really started learning stuff only when it became really hard and really frustrating. So keep at it. Then there's the, project was too ambitious, or realized that game development is much harder than I thought. And for that, I only have, it's hard work. It really is. It's not, it seems it's easy, but it's not. Then this is like a duplicated answer, but basically I abandoned the game because I got stuck on a specific game design issue. And this to me was a surprise, not the answer, but to me, when I started working on game development a long time ago, I kind of thought that game design would be the easy stuff, right? It's like, oh, that's the easy stuff. You just come up with new ideas and then you just implement them, and that's great. But game design is actually one of the most frustrating parts of game development, especially when it gets after a while, when you're like, okay, why isn't this as fun as I thought? What do I need to do for this to be more fun or more entertaining? Or where do I find ideas on how to make this game work for more than 10 minutes? And the problem is, again, for software engineers, is that that's not something that you can deal with your normal technical knowledge. Like, this is something that you have to just try again. You have to talk to people. You have to sometimes like rip out full features that you worked on for months in order to make this work and stuff like this, right? So don't underestimate how hard game design is. This is also, by the way, the reason why a lot of game developers will become game engine developers, because they're like, I like working on the technical side, but when it comes to game design, at some point it stops being interesting, so I kind of fall back to what I know, which is the technical side, and so you start working on game. I work from experience. I made a bunch of engines that nobody wanted to use, of course, including me. Okay, and then I jump here. Code got too messy. That's a reason for abandoning a game. Except games code just gets messy all the time. Well, we'll come back to it, but just like, if you want to take it seriously, be prepared to build some really messy code bases. And at the very bottom, you have these technical issues. Like, I got stuck on a performance issue or an architectural issue or something like this, right? I just want to point it out because these are pretty, after all of these kind of non-technical issues, you have the technical ones. If you're a software engineer like me, you would think that these would be up there. You stress more over these than over the others, but it's the other way around. All right, so hopefully we've addressed most of this, but I have more tips. So items on your quest to become a better game developer. First, don't content yourself with the usual genres. So a lot of people, for some reason, kind of default to 2D, especially 2D platformers. When I ask, like, what kind of game were you trying to build, a lot of people, like maybe even 90% of people would say, those who weren't the professional game developers, said they just try to do a 2D platformer, which is fine. If 2D platformer is what you want to do, if you're excited about building it, that's amazing. But I think a lot of people will just do it because they think that's easier, or because it's just like the obvious thing to do. And that's not, neither of it is true. So it's not easy. It's easier at first. It's easier to make a 2D platformer like a prototype than it is to make a 4X strategy or city builder prototype, sure. But when you want to release it and finish it, you'll probably come to the problem that if you want to release a 2D platformer that doesn't feel like it's 20 years old, you will have to add a lot more thought to it than to even that city builder. So that's one problem. The other problem is just, if you want to have players, and especially if you want to make money, then 2D platformer is probably one of the worst genres ever to do. And that's exactly because of this slide. So here this is Steam games, by the way, but it works similar ways, I'm sure, in other places. This is different gaming genres from left to right by median earnings. And you can see 2D platformer is all the way to the right. So if you choose to do a 2D platformer, then you expect to be like to earn 10 times less than if you do a roguelike deck builder, right? And you can also see the bar chart, the bars. They tell you how many games were released in that genre in a period of time. And you can see a bunch of 2D platformers here. And you can see just like, this is like maybe 2 years time, something like 1,300 2D platformers were made. But basically no one want to play them because there's way too many of them. And people who like to play 2D platformers probably need like, what, 2D platformers a year because they are replayable and stuff like this. On the other hand, roguelike builder almost nobody does. But if you make a roguelike deck builder, people will be like buying it and wishlisting it and everything, and throwing money basically at you because they want to play those games and they don't get made. So I'm not saying that you should be like, oh, I'm going to make a bunch of money and I'm going to build a roguelike deck builder. It's just that, like, look at what people actually want to play versus what people, which is kind of this graph, how much money they actually want to pay for it versus how many games are made in that genre. So, and by the way, for us Flutter people, for these games, like roguelike deck builder, in some ways 4X, simulation, city builder, these games, you don't even need something like Flame. Like a roguelike deck builder can be just a normal Flutter app with a lot of niceties around it, but that's what it is, right? Or city builder is basically a, you don't need like a 2D engine to do something like this. All right. So another problem that you might face is, okay, you start building your game, it looks terrible, and that's normal and that's okay. I just wanted you to know this. Don't abandon a game just because it starts looking terrible or that for a long time it's terrible. I wish I could show you how Knights of San Francisco started like but I don't have the screenshots from that time. But it looked terrible. But I can show you how my current game project, very early, looks like. So just you can see, this is something that I'm working on now, and I'm actually excited about this. Like I made this screenshot because I was like, wow, and that's because I know what's going on, but of course nobody else does. But that's fine, right? So don't feel like you have to, especially at first when you're like trying it yourself. You don't need to make it look nice or pretty. Then, kind of coming back to the code is bad, code looks bad. Sometimes people are like, well, I'm going to not finish my game because the code is in a state where everything is hacky. So that is also super normal. I love all the little, like, there are war stories from big studios how things got hacky. Sorry, that I don't want that. One of them that probably my favorite is how in Fallout 3, I think, they wanted to add a train, but their engine didn't have vehicles in it. So what did they do? They made a guy wear a hat that looks like a train, and they made the guy run really fast, but you couldn't see it because the person was below the tracks. So that's how hacky you can get, right? So and my code definitely has hacks like that, and your code will too, and that's okay. Because I read this today or yesterday, people are not playing your efforts, they're playing your results. You don't need to make the most amazing code out there. They are all about seeing that hat and thinking that it's a train. All right. Vertical slice is something, maybe you know this, but it's definitely something to know about in game development. This is basically, again, trying to work against what you would normally do, and that is when you start making a game, most people will just go and start making it the whole thing. So let's say you have this giant robot game, right? And so you know that you will have several planets and 20 different types of robots and lasers and rockets and everything. And so you like start working on it, the whole thing at once. And so you're like, okay, so 2 planets and blah, 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 and so on. Vertical slice is kind of the opposite. You force yourself to just take one little thing, like, okay, just 2 robots fighting it out in one biome. They don't have rockets yet, they just have lasers, but it should look nice and it should play nice and it should be fun. Even just this little slice of like 5-minute gameplay should be nice and it looks nice. If that's pretty hard to do, but think of it the way that you don't need to implement the meta game, you don't need to implement anything else. You just do that little thing, and if it doesn't work, then you do something else. And if it does work, then you have something that you can put in a GIF, and you can put it on social media or on Steam or somewhere, and get other people excited about it, because now you have something that like really good looks nice. People don't need to know that literally everything else is shit. They just see that GIF and they're like, I want to play that game. And then if you see that people are actually excited, then you have a really good reason to continue, but also sometimes you have good reason to like get other people excited to work with you on the game, sometimes getting money and so on and so forth. So that's vertical slice instead of like it's a depth first approach instead of a breadth first. You need to at some point become, if you're a solo on this, you have to become your own product manager. It took me way too long to realize this. I was working on my game and it was always 1 year, like I always thought, okay, in 1 year from now, I'm going to release it. And then a year later, it was like, okay, 1 year from now. So at some point, you have to be like, you know what? I need to be the asshole that says, so the product manager that says like, okay, you know what? This thing that's hacky, that stays there because otherwise we would never finish. This thing that you thought that would be really cool is not going to, we're not going to work on it, and so on and so forth. And as only after I started to be my own product, I even like started making spreadsheets, and I had like little, like I really wanted to have infighting in my game, which means that monsters fight against each other. In some ways it got to be there, but I was like, how much time will I lose by doing this? What's the coolness? What is the ratio of coolness versus days? And then like I just put it there and found out, okay, well, if I did all of these features, it would take me until January 7th to work it out, and I don't have that much time, so I just slashed those, right? And others I did. So that's just an example, of course, but you hopefully understand that you have to be that kind of person at some point that just says no to yourself. And lastly, use what's out there. It's very easy, again, for software engineers to be like, oh, I need to build my own game engine because, of course, I need something special. Don't do that. If you want 2D game 2D game with a game loop, Flame is there. If you want to have a game that is more just like pretty much a fancy app, then use Flutter itself. I think it definitely worked for me. It should work for you. I was able to help on this. There's a flutter.dev/games site where you can go, and there's a bunch of different things that you can use. There are definitely plugins and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's like if you really want to make an RPG game, there is literally, it's not a Flutter project, but there is an RPG maker. If you want to have that kind of like Japanese RPG game look, then there's literally a thing that you can buy, and it already does everything that you might want to do, and just use that instead of. And some really, really good games have been made with that product. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. All right, and so I'll close with a little exercise, and this one is not much about, trying to teach you about, I don't know, the technical details about game development, but it's more about how easy it is to kind of switch your thinking from app development to game development. So I thought, okay, what is like the normalest app in Flutter? Of course, it's the counter app that we all love. And I thought, okay, so there are probably a billion ways to make the counter app into a game, right? But what is like the laziest one? So this is 80 lines of code. Like, how do I make this into a game without really like importing any new libraries or anything like this? So I thought, okay, one way to do it, if you think about it, the counter app works like this. You increase a counter and the app shows you the current state of the counter, right? So what if we flip it around? What if the app, or game now, what if the app shows you the state of the counter and you have to push the button to get there? So instead of you have pushed the button this many times, it says you should have pushed the button this many times. And then it screams at you if you haven't, right? So that's the game. So if you go to philip.h.net/counter, it brings you to the Dart pad, and it's like 180 lines of code. It's ugly, but it works as a game, and it's kind of like, yeah, it's something that you can work with. I think I can show you. Is it here? Yeah. So you can restart the game, and now I have to be on 1, and then it gets harder and harder. I'm at 4. I think I got it to 13 one time. Okay, 9, right? So it gets harder and harder because the time between the things gets shorter. But the reason it's not like I want to show you that this is an amazing game, but this is how easy it is to get to a prototype. And now comes the boring and hard part, actually, because now you have to make this look juicy. You have to have like animations that actually make it into a game that feels like a game. You should feel pressured to do what you want. You also need to definitely work on stuff like how long does it take between the number increases, right? Right now it's just a random number between something and something, but that doesn't feel good. Like you can do this many different ways, and you can make it feel good if you put the time in it. So I leave it as an exercise to you, the reader, to like, if you want to try to make this into a game that you would actually show someone and they would be like, oh yeah, this is fun, right? And that's the hard part. So you can kind of see if you would enjoy this thing, then you might enjoy development of games. If that looks like something that you would hate, then probably game development is unfortunately not for you. But that's fine. All right. So that's it. I wanted to just conclude by saying, well, we talked about how important it is to have solo games and not just the big Marvel kinds of games, but games that have some kind of message. We talked about how the reasons why people don't finish games are very often very non-technical, but they are still important reasons. And we talked about what to do about it and about some of the different things that you should know about, like vertical slice, for example, or the fact that most games are actually really hacky at under the surface. I wanted to do, I definitely want to talk about this more and have more content about making games in Flutter, but I didn't have time to prepare anything yet. But I thought that at some point I will get to it, I'm sure. So I set up a mailing list. If you go to philiph.net/wait, you can put there your email address, and if I have at some point, it could be months from now, if I have at some point something to share with you in terms of literally just game development in Flutter, be it a YouTube video or a Udemy course or something else, then you will be the first to know. So, and with that, thank you.